Hey everybody, Scott Costa, publisher of TED Magazine. Thanks for joining us. Another video edition of the podcast, the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast. Got a great one for you. I got Mark McGready, who is the Director of Strategic Analytics for SparxIQ. He's going to be joining me. Smart guy. Love talking to the guy because I always learn something from him. You're going to also. We're going to talk about the importance of data and the importance of data analytics these days, especially with the coronavirus going on. We also want to talk about our sponsor for today, which is NAD's Market Data Program. The NAD Market Data Program is a service where electrical distributors submit confidential, anonymous, monthly point of sales data. Users are then able to see market values by region, product, or customer type. Users are only able to see the aggregated market data when there is enough data flowing into the system to maintain anonymity. The Market Data Program recently began displaying its first state data for 3 states, Illinois, North Carolina, and Virginia. More data is expected soon as more distributors begin submitting their data. If you want to find out more about the Market Data Program, go to nad.org/marketdata to get all the information that you need. Meanwhile, here we go, Distributed with TED Magazine podcast with Mark McGready. Mark McGready's with me. Appreciate you coming. A great guest. And before we'll just let the cat out of the bag now before people start listening. You were born and raised in what, like Alabama or Texas or something with that accent?
Yeah, I've been told I have a bit of an accent. I don't notice it myself, but I've been told that about every third word is legible with me. So if you've got a subtitle program, it might be necessary. But I'll see what I can do. When I go back to Ireland, they say I sound as American as anybody else, so I don't belong anywhere anymore.
Well, yeah, we're going to recognize the accent. Don't get me wrong, but it's great having you, and I appreciate the insight. As I've said before, I always learn something from you, so I'm excited about doing this podcast, talking about data and talking about sort of strategizing with the data that we have. So let's get into it. We talked, in February when we were at the NAD South Central Conference, and we talked about, the need for data and the need to, be able to make decisions going forward. And then, coronavirus hit, and people had a hard time making decisions because they didn't have enough data to make decisions, and it just kind of exemplifies the need to have it all the time. What kind of reactions have you been getting just over the past 4 months in terms of we desperately need more information?
Well, it's funny, Scott, because when I was at the NADs and I was doing my talk, I talked about the need to have a handle on your data so you can understand what's happening in your business. And I said, most of you are going to be fat and happy right now. Business has been good. Business has been smooth. You don't really see a need for this, but you should take an afternoon, sit in a room and say, what happens if 20% of our business disappears tomorrow? How do we understand what's happening and how do we respond to that? Have you got these kind of things in place? Because you never know what can happen. And I said that in early February. And then, I felt bad because 4 weeks later, 20% of business disappears overnight. And it just reiterates that you can never be too comfortable in life in general. You always have to just be a little bit careful and recognize what you have. But life throws things at you all over the place, and it's not about how you deal with it in the moment. It's just about what the response is long term and doing the smart things and the right things. And I've always said that data and databases are the brain of your company. That's what tells you exactly what's going on at any given time. And if you aren't thinking with your brain, if you aren't looking at that and saying, what just happened? What businesses have fallen away? Where has the business dropped off? Is this short-term, medium-term, long-term? Can we dissect the information to a complex enough level where we know specifically what's happened? Then you know how to respond to that. But I think what happened ultimately with most companies is they went straight into scramble mode and said, okay, this looks bad. And then they waited a week and watched the news and said, this isn't going to go away. And then they said, maybe April, maybe May, maybe June. Now we're in July. August is around the corner. And there's been a lot of what I would have expected, which is general cost cutting across the board and general batten down the hatches, get in the bunker. It doesn't matter for damaging the business with some of the things we're trying to do. We're just trying to survive, and then we'll figure it out when we come out on the other side. So I think I'm not a told you so kind of guy, but I told you so. It's it's been a true testament to, if they had this playbook in place and they could have turned to somebody, 3 weeks into April and said, what's happened and what do we need to do? And somebody had examined all the information and said exactly, this is where we are in trouble. This is what's going to rebound back. This is where we're going to have a loss. Then you could be a lot more specific and strategic in the regions and the product lines and the marketplaces that you needed to do something about. For smaller distributors, it doesn't really, they're small enough where everything's going to look the same. But we have a lot of larger distributor companies these days. We've got a lot of $300, $400, $500 million companies and way beyond that as well. And I don't think that they had become fluent enough in data analysis to be able to make the decisions that they really needed to, which is not the end of the world. But what I'm hoping is something like this is just a gentle prod to say, it's time to become 21st century and stop doing things that we had always done. It's time to really look into data analytics. I've been harping on this for years, saying that the company of the future, the company who's going to dominate 10 years from now, will be selling the same products, will be selling to the same customers, will be hiring the same kind of sales guy, will have the same kind of facilities. And their difference will be how smart they are. And that will come down to how they utilize their data to be able to drive revenue, to be able to drive profitability, to be able to manage operational costs and savings, and to be able to get an extra advantage over anyone else that they're competing against.
All right, I want to follow up on a lot of that. So stay with me here for a second here. Let's start with, you were talking about data is the brain of your company, of your operations. And I think that in the past, there was always some kind of preconceived notions, in terms of, well, I know what the data says, but I also know what I know. And
yes.
The result was you're making mistakes because you're not making decisions based on data. Has that changed a lot over the past 4 months? Because now it's like, hey, I got to throw everything away and I really have to have more reliance on data because we've never really been through something like this before.
Actually, I think COVID has been a good example of, I know what I know, but I didn't know what I know. There were mistakes made with the response to COVID. The famous one is you don't need to wear face masks. The second famous one is let's lock down everything because we don't know what we're doing. And that to me was a response of seeing the absence of data to make an informed decision, relied then upon, well, this is what I would have done in the past, or this is what I know. And those are not to get political, but those are probably mistakes to make, to not just enforce a face mask rule everywhere across the board to prevent the spread of it, and to, instead of locking everything down, just try to control the population a little bit more. And in hindsight, those are very obvious things that should have been called in back in as soon as this first appeared at the end of February. But people got caught up then in the moment of saying, well, this is what I think, rather than let's look at the data. Now we're in a different position with the schools reopening, where I think a lot of people really don't feel comfortable knowing what to do. There's some studies that say that it doesn't transmit from kids to adults. There's other studies that says that it can be a risk to children, and everyone's trying to figure it out on the fly. And we as a country have behaved as a unit that didn't have the necessary data to be able to turn to and say an informed decision. I think a lot of people think of data as accounting. Data is just a way of counting up numbers and telling what the result is and that sort of stuff. But that's not what data isn't. The number. Data is the insight. It is the activity. It is the action that can come from that. So almost data is kind of the wrong word, but it's what we use. You need to have analysts, and you need to have people who can look at the transactional information and come back and tell you what it means and how you need to respond to it. So I think the biggest thing that I've been saying to companies right now is we understand that the world fell apart for the last 4 months and nobody saw it coming. And this is a once in a generation thing. We really, really hope. We did what we needed to do to survive, and most of us have survived, kind of a thing, or kind of got by. So the question now is, what just happened? What do we need to understand to be able to dissect the last 4 months and say, what happened? Where are we now compared to where we were? can we get back to where we were, or do we need to do something a little bit different? And that to me should be every conversation for the second half of this year. Now we know that 2020 is probably going to be a loss. 2020 is going to continue with this nonsense until hopefully there's a vaccine or things settle down, or we move on from it. And so now we're at the point of saying, okay, how do we make 2021 or 2022 look like 2019? Or can it look like 2019? So part of that is, well, what do we look like, and what's the delta between the two, and what do we need to do specifically to try and bring things back to that level? Or do we got to do something a little different? Are we not going to capture that piece of business back again? So we need to start selling a different product line? Do we need to expand the capabilities? Do we need to hire a sales guy to go after a different marketplace? Do we need to open a branch in this market to try and move in because there's some weakness there right now? There's a lot of change is opportunity. Game of Thrones says that chaos is a ladder. And this is chaos. So for some, this will be a ladder. You just want to make the right decisions. And I've always maintained that the data that you have looked at with the right perspective tells you everything you need to know. It is the map laid out in front of you. And that's all you need to really study and look at.
So, again, everybody's talking about this recovery plan. One day we're going to come out of this. Nobody knows the exact time, but part one of the recovery plan is make sure that you have data to work with. Is that what you're saying, basically, in terms of, hey, look, you think we're going to go back to the way we were, 18 months ago? That might not hold true anymore. So the data that you're taking in now is actually what's going to form your form your recovery plan for 2021 or 2022. Is that the direction you're going in? And what should people be doing then to make sure that they're analyzing the data properly? We've talked about chief data officers before. Is something that people should be hiring. Is step one of the recovery plan have somebody who can analyze your data and make sure that you're analyzing data and go from there, or where do we go from here?
Well, I'll give you an analogy. If you're in the car and you get lost, forever you have been like, okay, let's take this road and then we'll go this way and see if we can get back in the highway again. Now you have a GPS in your pocket sitting on your phone. Mm-hmm. So how long do you want to drive around in the woods before you just break out the phone and admit that it's got the answers right there? So how we did things is how you did things because you didn't have the tools. Now you have the tools. Are you really going to drive around in the woods for another hour? Or are you going to break out your cell phone and have Google Maps tell you where to go? Data is your Google Maps. That's essentially what it is. I've always said there's a trick in trying to get someone who can analyze data, who then understands the commercial reality of what that data means. But you just need to put the right resources together. The data analysis is not a single person role necessarily if they're not really good at it. So they may need to work with somebody from a sales standpoint to figure out how to speak a language together, and they're interpreting it and working together. But I think fundamentally, if businesses don't have someone in their organization who knows how to analyze the transactional information and be able to answer 40 questions and tell them exactly what happened, they will have a hard time trying to build that person in the next couple of months. But they need to get the best equivalent that they have, marry them with a pretty good, sharp sales guy or branch manager or whatever it might be, and say, this is what the data says, what do you think it means? And they figure it out together as some sort of dialogue. But I think you absolutely fundamentally have to have that kind of analysis going at the moment. And to me, this really kind of reinforces the need to have that chief data officer in your company. Not an IT person. An IT person is a wildly different thing. They're a person responsible for maintaining the computer network, for your servers, and for your support and your software and that sort of stuff. They're not there to analyze data. They're there to make sure that all the tech, they're like a maintenance man in some ways. They're there to make sure that everything is running and functioning. It's not a finance person. The finance person is there to do the books and do the accounting and tell you where to stop spending money. This is a data person. This is someone who is there to analyze your company and look for patterns and trends and insights that, when you're big enough, are lost in the tens of thousands of transactions that you're doing every single month. There's someone who can mine through all of that information and come out and say, do you know that this is how our customers are responding for this? This is how our customers are buying this particular product line. this is where this branch is doing something that's different from everyone else. All the other things that can come from that kind of data analysis.
So to carry on to that, then I think we have to accept that there's the potential that a small amount of customers, a small percentage of customers, losing them could lead to a massive amount of revenue loss.
Yes, absolutely.
And so what does the chief data officer do? And what does your data do to offset that? Again, 2021, 2022, and you're trying to do the recovery. How is my data going to help me recover from that?
So, I mean, pretty much every distributor out there has a model where 80% of their revenues is 20% of their customers. And most of them know who their big accounts are. So it takes a long time to get those customers. Then you do what you can to try and maintain that relationship, and they tend to be fairly stable in the most part. It takes a significant act for them to move somewhere else. Somebody has to really make a mistake, or somebody has to make a big offer. But those customers are unstable too now as well. Those customers are not who they were, and we don't know where they're going to be when they come out on the other side of this as well. So your key accounts, you say you've got 200 key accounts. They got to be in 3 statuses. You got to be identifying this using the data right now. They are stable, good, we're okay. Let's just maintain a relationship and let them know how valuable they are. Then there is, these guys are rising and growing. This relationship seems to be going strong, so we just want to try and support them how we can. And then there's the trouble guys. These are the guys that have changed how they behave. Now, there's predictive analytics that you can put in place that can anticipate a customer defection, or anticipate that a customer's business is just falling off the map. All data analytics is looking at patterns. And you could be anticipating in advance that this customer is doing something that is unpredictable and unexpected months before the relationship is gone. So there's a little bit of defense that can be played. I think if companies just played a little bit more defense in some of their key accounts, then that would probably add, in my estimates and looking at my numbers, you could add 4 to 5% to your revenue every year just by playing better defense, rather than letting that slip out the door. On the other side, you got to identify the next key customers. You got to figure out who's the middle guys that we have today that we can elevate by sitting down in a room together and say, we want to be your strategic supplier. Tell us what we need to do. Where do you need to be from a pricing standpoint, and we'll try and get it. Where do we need to be from a support standpoint? Because you're going to have to fill some of that hole a little bit as well. Because for a lot of distributors, if they lost 2 or 3 of those big guys, that's a lot of revenue that can fall off the map very quickly. Suddenly you could be down 15 to 20% of the revenues that you were. And that on top of where COVID has put a lot of people, can suddenly put you in a real cash flow problem. So you got to consider who your key guys are right now and what their status is, and how you're going to, from a sales standpoint and a marketing standpoint, respond to them. But then you got to farm the existing accounts. And hunting's not a big thing in this industry necessarily. A lot of people serve the customers that they've had, and hunting tends to be only 3 or 4% of revenues every year. But it's worthwhile. There's been a lot of instability with sales guys getting laid off and that sort of stuff. So go poach. Go hire a couple of hunters or a couple of guys that have been laid off somewhere else, and see if you can bring them in, and if they can convert a couple of customers as well. I mean, this is open season. So as soon as you have reduced cost, it's earliest you can is when you start increasing to try and help build you back again. Because if you sit in your hands and you wait for everything to be great, you're already going to be behind everyone else who's doing the other things.
A good point. We talked, again, months ago about something that we wanted to do called Project 2030, which was we were going to look at where distributors needed to be 10 years from now. We talked in February about, hey, whether it's e-commerce or your succession plan, because, some of your executives are close to retirement, or data, hiring a chief data officer. And, we were thinking, yeah, this will be great. 118 months from now, we can implement some of the, now it's like, hey, we need to implement this in August. Forget about 118 months. We need it in like 118 hours. How is data sort of forcing us to ramp that up, or helping us ramp that up to get to the future faster than we need to get to the future?
Well, I mean, I have talked about the big trends that I see happening in electrical, and the two big ones is distributed consolidation. And the other is going to be the absence of the boomer workforce, essentially, all those sales guys. 25% of the sales guys are in that bracket that are going to be retiring in the next 5 or 10 years. This has been talked about a lot. The senior leadership is going to be retiring at some point. And they've kind of been there for the last 30 years or so. There's many distributorships that can say, that's Billy. Billy's been working here for 35 years. He knows everyone in the marketplace. When Billy goes, everything that Billy does goes with him. It's not just a person who's leaving. It's an infrastructure that's leaving with him. And you're going to replace him with another guy who doesn't work that way or think that way, and has not been raised to think that way. The millennial generation is a data generation. They need to have direction and guidance and that sort of stuff, and then they can work with it. But we're raised to examine data and look at data and look up data and all of that sort of stuff. So 2030 was, okay, this is when all of this will have eventually kicked in, and that means that we'll need to change what our sales processes look like. We'll need to look at our order process, what our customer support looks like. And a lot of that will be driven by data. But this has just hastened things significantly, where we need to get good at that now in order to be prepared for the future. So I had originally said, what do you think your company is going to look like in 10 years and where are you going to be? Now it's, within 5 years. The consolidation thing I talked about, as more and more distributors are moving into more marketplaces and they're becoming, I call them super regionals. So super regional guys that operate in multiple states. There's going to be an entire generation of small electrical distributors that are either going to close or going to try and sell off. So the acquisition market's going to be pretty active for the next few years, and we're going to get more and more big guys. But then you bring in all of these separate, disparate companies and trying to bring them all together. And that's very difficult to do. And when you buy someone in, more often than not, when somebody acquires a company, it goes wrong rather than going right. And again, that has to be driven by having a consistent culture of data analysis and process and all of that sort of stuff that come along with that. You can't remove all the guys who made a company work and then expect the company to run the exact same way. And that's essentially where these things go wrong all the time. So there's to me, an accelerated need for the adaptation of all of the things that we have talked about. And we've seen this happening in all our industries previously, and we've always said that electrical has kind of been a little bit more insular and been able to be a little bit more conservative because it doesn't have the same outside dynamics. But all you need to do is turn the corner and look at the electronics industry, for example, to see that there's a company that's already figured this out and is already in that path years ago. And the time has come now. And the guys who figure this out will be the guys who win, and the guys who say, I don't know if I believe that or I need to do that. In 10 years' time, we'll be looking around and wondering what happened.
Right. Well, I'm saving the tough question for last. So are you ready? I mean, we have to accept that our members make great products. Our members are selling great products. There's certainly cash flow issues, and there's issues with what price we should be selling at. And the fact of the matter is there's probably some price increases that we're facing during a pandemic. But there's got to be some kind of a system in place. I mean, how do we know what the right pricing is and what the wrong pricing is, especially when it comes to price increases? And so how does that come into play? I mean, I think a lot of people are struggling with just, what's the right price on products and price increases during a pandemic. Where should we be going with this?
I mean, again, it requires data and it requires the smarts and it requires the discipline to have that in place. Distributor pricing is incredibly complicated. Pricing in the industry is incredibly complicated. 70% of everything that's sold is sold at a special negotiated price. So you've got an avalanche of negotiations happening all the time. And I always used to make fun back in my Square D days that you could have 5 guys standing in line to buy a 20 amp circuit breaker from, Crescent Electric or something like that. And each of them pays a different price for that same product. And that's normal, that's expected. But it's insane when you think about it too. It's like, well, how do you know who's paying the right price out of those 5 guys? There's a need. I have said there's a need for a data officer. You need to figure out who in your company is going to be, whose job it is to analyze the data and tell you what it says. there's clearly a need for a pricing officer too. Again, not a finance person, again, not an IT person, but there has to be a czar in charge of pricing at the company. And I think there's a lot of proud people in this industry. So there's a lot of companies that said, well, we can figure this out ourselves. You know, we're good at this. We know we understand our business. You don't think we can know how to price things? But I've looked at a lot of distributor data, and there hasn't been a single company I haven't just opened the curtain at and said, you don't even know what's happening with your pricing right now. Where I've gone in, and it's taken a day. This isn't something where I've had to do insights for 6 or 8 weeks. I just get the transaction data. The next day I call up and say, do you know what this tells me? So I think companies need to become good at pricing. They need to get that level of expertise. And you can DIY it and take what comes with DIY. Maybe you hire the right person who's got some experience. But if you're going to look at some kid and say, well, he's going to become a pricing guy and we're going to teach him to get there, then, you know, kiss goodbye 4 or 5 years for him just to be able to become fairly fluent. To me, it's like moving to a foreign country and saying, well, I'll figure out the language whenever I get there, you know, and I'll be, no, you know, get somebody who's fluent in this and who understands all of this. So I think companies really need to take a look at working with pricing consultancy companies or price service companies, or they need to get a better understanding of where the pricing is and where the weak spots are so they can do something about it. But it's a complicated subject. It shouldn't be taken lightly and it shouldn't be done cheaply. But an investment in pricing, I think an investment in data pays for itself 50-fold. You get one really good data person in your organization and they will make 50 times their salary and impact of your business in the first year, just by showing you where you can do things better. An investment in pricing is in similar ballpark. You get good at that. You get strategic with that because the manufacturers are going to be coming in with a lot of price increases. There's a lot of price instability. You need to know where you need to use price as a weapon or where you need to use price as a shield. And getting that level of expertise and putting that in place is how you fund everything else that you want to do. And you can't be two distributors selling the same product to the same sales guys to the same customers. One guy makes 2%, one guy makes 5%, and expect that the 2% guy is going to be around for that much longer. They've got so much more available cash. They'll be able to outspend you. They'll be able to outmaneuver you. They'll be able to give a price more strategically when they need to. You got to keep up with the Joneses when it comes to profitability and pricing.
So always some great information from you. Always great analogies, whether it's driving and getting lost or moving to a foreign country.
Or Game of Thrones quotes.
Yeah, or Game of Thrones. You've always got something for us, which is great. And I appreciate that. Folks are going to want to contact you, and I'm sure there's more questions. So give us some contact information, how folks can get in touch with you.
I'm working with SparxIQ now, so you can get me through SparxIQ.com. That's SparxIQ.com. My email is mark.mcgready@SparxIQ.com. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Mark McGready, I think, in the world. So look me up on LinkedIn and hit me up. And I could talk about this stuff forever. So I'm always happy to
It's such an uncommon name. I'm sure you are the only Mark McGready in the world yet. But I appreciate it. And it's always great insight. I look forward to the opportunity again to sit with you at an NAD event like we have, you know.
Oh, fingers crossed, someday soon. Yeah. I don't think it'll be 2020, but, you know, and there'll be a lot of people desperate to get out of the house after Christmas. So let's hope that we can do so.
I hope so. I know where I can find you after dinner at the NAD events. So
it's possible. Yeah.
It's great talking to you, Mark. Thanks for joining me on the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast.
Thank you, Scott. All the best.
All right, a great conversation with Mark McGready. Again, I always learn something from the guy, which is great. And it's always great to have him on the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast. Hey, if you want to contact me to talk about this podcast, talk about other podcasts, talk about anything that NAD is doing, 2 ways you can do that. One, you can email me, scosta, SCOSTA @NAD.org. I'd love to hear from you. Send me your emails if you want to. And check this out. I have a phone. You can give me a phone call anytime you want. I answer my own phone, so give me a shout, 314-812-5311. Love to hear from you. Let's talk. I can certainly spend the time with all of you. Also want to remind you about the NAD Market Data Program. The program is a service where electrical distributors submit confidential, anonymous monthly point of sales data. Users are then able to see market values by region, product, or customer type. Users are only able to see the aggregated market data when there is enough data flowing into the system to maintain anonymity. Market data program recently began something important. The first state data available for Illinois, North Carolina, and Virginia. More data is expected soon as more distributors continue to submit their information. If you want more information on it, you can go to naed.org/market data to get all the information you need. Thanks everybody for watching the Distributed with Ted Magazine podcast.